What's up everybody, Ian and G Money here with 5 exercises to get you into a back bend. We're going to break down some of the things that you really need to put together to get into that shape, and the first one that we're going to talk about is going to be shoulder flexion. So think just being able to get your shoulder overhead, getting it behind your ear so that you can get it back there in that position. We're going to need to think about spinal extension since you're really arching your back as much as possible. We're going to need to really bring a lot of length through the abs in the front and then be able to get that T-spine to be able to extend backwards. When we're talking about down low, the hips are going to need to be able to extend fully, so we're going to work on that. And then also, last but not least, the wrists are going to need to extend as well. So those are the positions that we're going to be training through this. So let's go ahead and get into it. This is the prone shoulder flexion lift off. So this is a great exercise for training shoulder flexion, obviously, but especially in the context of doing a back bend, you need to get your arms all the way over your head if you're going to get them behind you and arch your whole back. G Money and I really enjoy doing this on the bench because it gives the person that might just be getting into it a little bit more leeway if they can't get past their ears. So if you're on the ground, it's going to be a progression, but you can do it there. I think another progression for people might be how close their hands are together. So you can kind of mess around with that. And you might even do reps where you actually don't go as high, but you load it up so you can get a little bit more of a strength stimulus as well. So something to consider. If you wanted to use this in the context of training a chin up, you could also flip your hands over. So great exercise that has a lot of applications. So let's go ahead and go through a rep. Let's go ahead and take a nice relaxed inhale, long exhale. Rib cage and pelvis are nice and connected there. And then we're gonna go ahead and, I like to think, straighten out the elbows as much as you can. Now you're gonna lift. When you lift, I want you to think about an arcing motion away and then up, which should kind of create some space at the shoulder as well. And then when you're holding there at the top, let's see you try to hold and give me, even though the wrist is gonna be extended, let's do a rep where you have no wrist extension, and then we can also do reps where you do have wrist extension, which would be in line with what we're talking about in the back bend. So let's just go ahead and do 5 reps. Good. And what you should feel is a pretty intense burn throughout your shoulders, especially the mid back and upper back. A compensation would be to really overarch your back. Let's show me a really bad one. Good, so you can see he's basically faking the motion by really tensing these up and lifting these up. And then do one where you really bend your elbows. So you might go all the way up and bend your elbows. Not the end of the world, but definitely a compensation when you're not trying to. And then another one might be do some weird neck stuff so that they can see that. There you go, good. Okay, so that's how we're gonna do that. If you have any questions, let us know.
So this is one of my favorite exercises for loading hip extension. And in the context of back bending, if we can't access our end range hip extension, then we're not gonna be able to access the current amount of shoulder flexion and spinal extension we have in the back bend itself. So let's walk Ian through a few reps of this. So to start off, we don't want the knee completely flush against the wall or the bench here because we want to leverage hip extension here. It's not so much important to have full knee flexion. So we want to start off posteriorly tilting the pelvis here. So we want to think belt buckle to belly button. And this is going to give us a full stretch of this rectus femoris and psoas. And now from here, while keeping this alignment, you're going to extend the hip and think about pushing the hip forward. So a lot of times we like to elevate this back knee because if you're limited in hip flexion on the front knee, you might feel a little bit blocked off when you move into that hip extension. So a couple things you can do is abduct and kind of move this knee out to the side a bit to clear some space. And you can also bring your foot in front of the knee here. Yeah, so that'll just give you a little bit more space. So the repetitions here are going to be Ian extending his hip out, so pushing the hip forward. Now once he finds that end range position, I want you to squeeze the butt. So think about posteriorly tilting the pelvis harder. And then from there, you're going to think about doing a hanging knee raise out of it, engaging the hip flexors, coming back to the start position. So it's okay that he's using a support here because we don't want stability to be the limiting factor in this. We want it to be the stretch. Now once he's comfortable with this, he could take a light weight and we're gonna hold it overhead. So for the stiffer person who can't find enough hip extension, adding a little bit of load will help leverage a greater stretch. So now you can move into hip extension from here Think about driving the hip forward, and this load is pushing the hip down into extension. Find the glutes at the end range, and then press yourself out of it by pushing the foot into the bench and then dragging the knee forward. So we'll do this for about 8 to 10 repetitions with a 3 to 5 second hold each rep. Some common compensations here are Ian will hyperextend the back at the end range. Now he's no longer moving through the hips, he's just moving through the spine, which is okay in back bending, but we want to stay relatively isolated here.
This is the standing arch progression. So in the context of the back bend, we're looking to be able to extend our spine, especially getting that sternum to come up and over as we lean back. A great way to regress that movement without even having to get your hands on the ground and actually create the shape are to start working on segmenting with your hips on the wall. So like we mentioned, having hip extension, but also being able to extend your spine too. So what G-Money's gonna do is try to keep the front of his hips basically against the wall, maybe a little bit off of the wall. And he's gonna think one by one, going up from his belt buckle, is gonna slowly start to extend back. He's gonna only go back a little bit on the first one and then go back, and then each one maybe get a little bit more. So hopefully you've done a cat-cow before, a spinal car, and now you're kind of taking that same exact idea and just doing it in a more specific shape that's going to carry over to the back bend a little bit more. What we definitely want to feel is you want to feel an opening on the front side, especially right below your sternum, getting that stretch through the tissues that your six pack would crunch down. So getting those tissues to lengthen is very, very important here. So you can kind of think about getting a couple of those, get good at that. If you want to put something behind you that blocks it out and gives you a little bit of a safety net, you can do that as well. And now let's turn around. And if we want to go for range or really be able to get even a little bit deeper, we can just turn around. We lose the tactile feedback here, although you could put a bench or something there, a box. And then you're going to go ahead and slowly lean back here. And you see we're getting that lengthening through the front side, especially through the six pack, where a lot of people might be crunching. We need to be able to open that up if we're going to be able to get back there. So obviously the further away from the wall or even the farther down your hands get would represent more of that bend. Getting a couple of reps, maybe building up a little bit of tolerance over time, spending 5 seconds there, then 10 seconds there, maybe doing one breath cycle there would make some sense. So a really great way to specifically start training that full extension through the spine with hip extension. Really cool that your shoulders are not necessarily loaded in this way and your wrist isn't either. So if those are holding you back, this is a good little middle ground to get that as well. That's how we're going to do that one. Let us know if you have any questions.
So this is the foot elevated bridge progression. So we're going to start off with the arch of our foot on the bench, and then we're going to bring the hands outside of the head. We want to start with a wider grip than we'd be used to, and we want to keep the elbows inside or just directly over the wrists. We don't want to flare the elbows out too much. Now from here, we're going to simultaneously push into hip extension while pushing in the floor and extend into the bridge. Now from here, we really want to focus on using the cues we did in the hip extension couch stretch and using our glutes to drive the hips through and bring the shoulders over top of the wrists. Now, if you're finding that you can't get the shoulders on top of the wrists here, maybe it looks something like that. It's going to put a lot of pressure on the wrists, so you would want to elevate the feet even higher on the bench. So we can hold for time, or we could do some kind of bridge push-ups and actively move in and out of the range, or we could stay here and kind of do some dynamic repetitions forward, pushing into hip extension. The options are endless, or we could just kind of hold for time and then lower down slowly, support yourself in the head, bend the neck, and then come back down. So once you feel comfortable with the foot elevated bridge variations, we can take it to the floor and do the full thing and actually train the skill directly. So we're going to start in this hook lying position, comfortable distance here with knee flexion. We're going to bridge the hips up slightly, start arching at the spine, get a comfortable grip, nice wide grip with the hands, and we're going to simultaneously push up into hip extension, get on top of the head, and then push up and over Okay? A lot of times what will happen is people will just kind of push away from the hands and they don't actually go over. So we want to actually extend at the hip, which will naturally bring the shoulders more over the wrists. So we want to think about posteriorly tilting or tucking that pelvis under, even though we're in this globally arched position of the spine. So think about extending the knees, almost pushing the knees away from the body. And that'll give us this nice bridge shape. Kind of helps to think about just pushing the hips up as opposed to just jamming the chest forward, and that'll just kind of impinge the shoulders. So again, we can hold for time. We could do reps in a push-up, moving in and out of the range. We can do some slight contract relax where we're trying to drag our palms against the ground and then move into a deeper range. Options are endless here. And then come back out of it onto the head. And that's the floor bridge. Okay, this is the bench thoracic spine extension. So we want this to set our bench or a box up at a distance where we can keep our arms straight on this barbell. So we're gonna find kind of a tight spot in our thoracic spine, which is the upper back, kind of area below the shoulder blades. And we're gonna use that as the hinge point. So we're gonna have the edge of the bench closest to you as the fulcrum for thoracic extension. So for me, that's kind of right in between my shoulder blades. I'm gonna rest my head and I'm gonna get a nice grip on the barbell. So for here, we wanna make sure we're kind of pulling our elbows toward the ground. This is that external rotation of the shoulder. This is gonna kind of clear any impingement. So right when we find that spot on the T-spine, we're gonna drop the hips to leverage the stretch. And we should feel this all in the upper back and a little bit of a stretch in the abs. If we're starting to find a lot more extra range here, we can now straighten out the legs, and this will allow for our hips to sink even lower. So now what we can do is some shortening angle contractions where we try to pull our butt toward the ground while we try to lift the feet off. We're not going to move since we're at our end range, and this is going to really fire the upper back here. And we can hold for about 5 to 10 seconds and then relax. Long exhale, sink lower. It's really important we're keeping smooth breath cycles here to mobilize the rib cage. Okay, and slowly come out of it.
All right, so now that we've seen the 5 exercises, I wanted to talk to G Money a little bit about his personal experience, as he's had years to really get into this position and he's really crushed it now. So what are some things that maybe would be helpful for the audience to know about your journey to get into the back bend?
So I generally fall into the category of the naturally stiff person, and just understand that it's really important to take time to go through these progressions before doing the full thing. I've been training the bridge for about 6 years now, and now I'm at a point to where I can maintain it with minimal work, maybe 15 minutes a week. But I spent a lot of time just working on the isolated pieces while simultaneously doing direct skill work for the bridge, which you saw in this video. But just understand that it's going to take time. I like to give people the 18-month rule. So if you look back on yourself 18 months from now, you're generally going to have some sort of level up in flexibility. And that's not only with the bridge, but for any big flexibility position you're trying to obtain. So I'd say that's the biggest thing for me, was just giving it time and consistent inputs, training it at least twice a week.
Awesome. So definitely be patient with it. Make sure you're easy on yourself. Be consistent over everything, especially over a long period of time, and you'll slowly start seeing it open up. Let us know if you've had any questions, and thanks for watching.